Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and in America, that's New Comic Book Day, when comic book fans go to their local comic shop, their LCS, and stand around paging through things they have no intention of buying, and politely ignoring their gigantic pull list, which they can't in any way afford. uh, and my comics news for today is twofold. And one part of the comics news is placid and quiet and peaceful, and the other part very much is not. So we're going to start off with the placid, quiet, peaceful part of my comics news for today, which is, well, and of course this video is for comic book fans. The rest of you, that's all I'm going to talk about for the video, for this one video. The placid comic book news for today is the comics that I myself bought. Now, I've mentioned during a few of these Comic Book Wednesdays that I don't really buy the floppy, stapled, single-issue comics anymore. Every once in a great while, but usually not. I'm well behind on all of the stories, and haven't particularly liked a lot of the stories that I've read recently. So I tend to go to my local comic shop, Comicopia here in Boston, for collections, graphic novels, anthologies, that sort of thing, books that I can actually put on the shelf, and usually books, collections, anthologies, whatever, of stuff that I already know I like, that comics from the past, in other words. And I went to my local comic shop today. I went to Comicopia today, intent on doing that, and I don't know. I always feel like I'm letting the side down. I mean, like any other comic book fan, I spent decades living and dying by individual issues, looking forward to them every week. Decades ago, it never occurred to any of us there would come a time when every week would have a book with comics in it, a collection, a reprint volume. That's great news. The comics, I mean, much as I love them, I have so many good memories invested in them, they fall apart. And they're a lot harder and more cumbersome to store than just putting books on a shelf. And thanks to the healthy reprint culture in the comic books industry in the 21st century, there literally is almost every week something that I want to buy. And that was true this week. I've mentioned before that Marvel Comics, the home of Spider-Man and the X-Men and Wolverine, has two ongoing reprint lines. They have a very expensive hardcover Marvel Masterworks series where they will go to a certain character, like Submariner, Tales to Astonish, or whatever, or the X-Men, or the Fantastic Four, or Doctor Strange, and they will start at the character's first appearance and just in increments, volume by volume, reprint everything, marching forward to the present day. And there was a Marvel Masterworks volume out this week. I think it was a late volume of The Defenders. But it didn't interest me because I remember reading those issues of The Defenders and thinking, I used to, there have been high points in The Defenders run, and one of the high points was a terrific storyline about race riots and racial tension. Oh, wonderful stuff. But this particular run had no interest for me. But there was another one. There's another reprint series that Marvel does called the Epic Collection, where they don't march in inexorable forward march. Instead, they hop all around, getting eras and storylines and arcs and parts of arcs, and there appears to be some overarching organizational scheme. I don't know if that's actually true, but one way or another, I have yet to see any of the Epic Collections accidentally step on each other and reprint the same stuff twice. So there might be a larger, a graph on a board somewhere in Marvel Comics, one way or another. The Epic Collections are in paperback. They're not as expensive. They're still too expensive, twice as expensive as they should be. And they're all in color, and I like them. I like them quite a bit. And there was one this week that I wanted, and it's this. It's Spider-Man No More. One of the Epic Collections. I think this is, this is the third or fourth or fifth even Spider-Man Epic Collection. And this collects great old Stan Lee and John Romita Sr. issues from 1966 and 1967 of The Amazing Spider-Man, with a couple of annuals and a few other additions thrown in. It's a little bit odd. It's called Spider-Man No More, which is, of course, the title of Spider-Man number 50, one of the iconic Spider-Man issues of all time. And yet it has the cover of Spider-Man fighting the Hulk with the Avengers looming to interfere. I can't help but think that that's at least partially a nod to Avengers Infinity War. Especially since I can't think of another reason why you wouldn't go with the cover of Spider-Man number 50, Spider-Man No More, which is one of the most immediately visually recognizable covers of any comic book for comic book fans. It's this. Why wouldn't you go with a John Romita Sr. Classic instead of this? I have no idea, but one way or another, I got over that fairly quickly and just dug into the issues, which are so good. I mean, it's a different era, not just of Spider-Man, where he's a college student, and Aunt May is constantly frail and sick and in bed with the covers up to her chin, constantly in need of attention, and he meets Mary Jane Watson for the first time. It's not just a different era of Spider-Man, it's also a different era just in history. I mean, these are the issues that introduced the Kingpin of crime, who was, before he became Daredevil's arch nemesis, was a Spider-Man villain. And the whole point of Kingpin is that he's decided that the rival gangs plaguing the streets and businesses of New York City need a chairman. They need one person in control, and it, of course, will be him. Which is a callback to a time when organized crime was, far more visible and far more rampant in New York City. And not only that, as long as we're talking about bygone eras in history, let's remember that in these issues, Peter Parker is putting himself through college in New York on a freelance newspaper photographer payment. He gets paid per batch of photos, and he's putting himself through college. Those days are gone. It's the publisher of the Daily Bugle, where he publishes his photographs, would probably have to go to a safety school in Ohio and couldn't go to school in New York, even the publisher, much less, a freelance photographer. But this has all the usual cast of characters. It has J. Jonah Jameson. He has some great moments in these issues. There's one in particular that I really like, where the Kingpin kidnaps him in order to put pressure on him to stop running exposés about organized crime in New York. And, J. Jonah James is always shaking his fist at Spider-Man. He's constantly running editorials. Spider-Man, threat or menace? He hates the webhead. Just hates him. and he's a blowhard. He's a bit of a softie. He always comes through with a paycheck for Peter Parker. But it's wonderful that in the moment when the Kingpin's thugs bring J. Jonah Jameson to his office, and he makes his threat clear, it's wonderful that Stan Lee remembers, wonderful but also typical, Stan Lee never forgets the humanity of any of his characters. But it's wonderful that he remembers in that moment, because he has J. Jonah Jameson say, well, who the heck are you to tell me what I can and cannot publish? Very nice little moment. And there are lots of others. I mean, J. Jonah Jameson is largely done for comedy in these issues. And in the issues that immediately follow this run, so this is Spider-Man 39 through 52, and in the issues immediately following this run, which I think is another Epic collection, I think I might already have that, that's when Stan Lee really gets J. Jonah Jameson's comedy register. And then there are some moments that, some pages, some whole stretches that are just wonderful. And yet he ups the pathos as well. When J. Jonah Jameson's managing editor stands up to him, for instance, in later issues. But in these issues, the thing that I really noticed rereading them this time around is what an amazing roster of bad guys Stan Lee just rolls out one after another. You look at well, I don't know much about 2018 individual ongoing comics, but I remember 6 or 7 years ago when I was buying individual comics, I remember how if a comic writer introduced a new supervillain, I would just start the clock for the supervillain to turn out to be lame, or for the logic of their continuity to trip over itself and fall flat on its face, or one way or another. The idea of coming up with a winning supervillain almost never happens. And in these issues, one after another, either reintroducing characters that were in issues before these, or introducing characters. They've got Kraven the Hunter. You've got the Kingpin. You've got the Rhino. You've got not only the Vulture, but a new guy who is the Vulture. You've got the Shocker. A whole bunch of characters that just walk on and make trouble The Lizard has a wonderful stretch here. And the formidable nature of those villains is contrasted with a thing that Stan Lee was adamant about always making sure was present in his run on Spider-Man, which is the humanity, the vulnerability, the ordinariness of Peter Parker. It doesn't matter that he has super strength. It doesn't matter that he has, that he can web sling across the skyscrapers of Manhattan. There are many issues in here where he fights with a broken arm. His arm is in a sling. There's a classic moment in one of these issues where he has the flu. Simple as that. And eventually, just like anybody else with the flu, it turns him into a big puddle of goo. Only it happens to happen when he's fighting the Vulture. And the artwork by John Romita Sr., who these issues, he's just beginning to gain his strength as a Spider-Man artist, and he reaches the peak of his artwork in the next 30 issues. But even here, you can see it clear as day, him getting stronger by the issue, more confident by the issue. And the way you can tell that with any artist, with any comic book artist, is by the number of panels on one page. The lower the number of panels. If an artist starts to be able to do a lot more with only 3 panels on a page instead of 9, for instance, that's when you know. That's when you can tell that they're really coming into their own. And also that simpatico is developing between them and the writer. And boy, you get that in these issues. It's just wonderful to see. It's wonderful to watch happen. I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun rereading these things. I couldn't help but notice a little bit at the end. They always reprint comedic stuff and fillers and little page things, filling you in on the character and all that sort of stuff from old issues or from special annuals or whatever. And one of them they reprint is this thing here. I remember it from ages ago. There is Spider-Man holding up on a platform the 5 Marvel characters who are physically stronger than he is. The Thing, Hercules, Thor, Prince Namor the Submariner, and the Hulk. No, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is not the strongest cut-up in Marveldom. Even he must admit there are those who are stronger. But remember, our boy is still a youngster. And we have Spider-Man saying, no matter who you are, there's always someone stronger. No wonder I'm riddled with phobias and deep-rooted hang-ups. And I have to wonder, how many people would be on that platform now in the current Marvel continuity? According to the greatest book ever written in the history of mankind, I, of course, refer to the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, Deluxe Edition, Spider-Man can lift, that is, bench press, about 10 tons. And on this figure here, the Thing is up at 85 tons, so is the Submariner when he's fully hydrated. Hercules, Thor, and the Hulk are all class 100 tons or more. So, Thor, for instance, strength-wise, immeasurably outclasses Spider-Man, and I wonder. I'm trying to rack my brains to think of which characters in the Marvel Universe now would be on that pedestal. Characters who are stronger than Spider-Man. Of course, Colossus from the X-Men comes right to mind. And there are bad guys. There are plenty of bad guys. We don't know how strong the Rhino is. For instance, he could easily be stronger than Spider-Man. The Juggernaut certainly is. and a whole bunch of other things. But I love thinking about dorky stuff like that. So I was very happy to get this. This is my comics purchase for today. It was very simple. It was very peaceful. I went into my comic shop. I walked to the back wall. I saw this. I walked over. I paid for it. And I left. I have a system set up now at Comicopia where I pick graphic novel book type items that I want. I let them know. They order a copy if they're not going to get it anyway, and that takes the guesswork out of it. So because I used to hate that. I used to hate going into this shop or any other shop, wanting something that I knew was coming out today and realizing that some fanboy had beat me to it and they only had one copy, so the whole trip was wasted. It was different when I was going to the area of the comic shop 4 or 5 times every week, but I'm not anymore. So it's a bigger deal. So I will make a little laundry list of stuff that I want, but I didn't put this on the list. I didn't know it was coming out, but I was very happy to find it, and I'm sure that I will reread this, and in the meantime, it will go on the shelf with all the other Epic collections, which is nice and neat, nice and convenient. So I want to stress, this was the peaceful element of the comic book world today. The not so peaceful element didn't have anything to do with me. It's a piece of news in the comics world that those of you who are in the comics world might have heard about, and those of you who are not in the comics world will certainly not have heard about it. It's a thing called Comicsgate. By some. There are other names for it, but mostly it's known now as Comicsgate, which I've mentioned on this channel before, months ago. The name is sort of a doff of the hat to Gamergate, and there are some similarities, but the nexus, if you will, is a YouTube channel called Diversity in Comics. That's the name of the channel. And the guy who runs it started it originally to mercilessly poke fun at the YA garbage that had migrated into some Marvel comics. Some of the ordinary, tried and true Marvel comics had suddenly been taken over by YA authors who don't know anything about comics and don't care about comics and just wanted to make, four-color pictorial YA novels. And you had all the staples of current 2017, 2018 YA. You have, useless, emasculated young males, much along the narrative line of John and Hank Green, of their characters, where there's not going to be any toxic masculinity and haplessness. The main distinguishing characteristic of most YA, of the type that migrated into Marvel Comics over these years, was the haplessness that is epitomized by that kind of YouTube presentation. That, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll do something. And the sort of a drastic rebalancing of the scales in terms of social justice, distortions, whereas this guy, this YouTuber, Diversity in Comics, and a few other channels that cropped up in his wake have pointed out, all of a sudden, in the world reflected in the comic books at Marvel, pretty much every character was suddenly gay, or at least seriously thinking about it. And that's kind of strange. That's not, as Stan Lee has always described Marvel Comics, the world outside your door. That is most certainly not the world outside your door. So I watched this guy's early videos with a smile on my face, because he was merciless and he was funny. He didn't just critique the issues, he also mocked the creators. He found them on social media where they were pretty much what you'd guess, and it was all just a horror show. And it seemed like he arrived at just the right time and took just the right tone to just go at this stuff. And of course, the professionals that he attacked hated it. They hated the fact that he was saying, this isn't comics, this isn't normal, these stories aren't good. Here, point by point, is why this artwork is bad. I'm not just saying it doesn't appeal to me. I'm saying it's technically bad, and here's why. And he would go through it, panel by panel. I thought that was really captivating. And I watched his subscriber count go up and up and up. And I watched more and more channels crop up, basically forming a sort of a deep bench of followers of his, and those channels have grown as well, and they show a remarkable variety. The base medium of them are pretty much the same. They take his points and just reissue them more crudely and in almost all cases less comedically. But a handful of those channels are quite different. They've taken the same tack, which is that something is very badly wrong with a large chunk of Marvel Comics and needs to be fixed. It needs to be corrected. It's their industry. That's what the point of Comicsgate is. This is our hobby. You don't care about it. You've just latched onto it like a horde of locusts, and that's not right. We want it back. Comicsgaters and their fans have kind of strenuously tried not to say make comics great again, because the parallels are obvious, right? And I've tried not to let that color my thinking. And I've been helped in that because some of these secondary channels, these other booktube channels on these subjects, although they share the exact same subject matter as Diversity in Comics, go at it from many different ways. You have there's one guy who breaks down the statistics, the sales numbers, the company bylaws, all that sort of stuff, does a wonderful job of it. There's another guy who's a tremendously gifted satirist, just far more pointedly satirical than the original Diversity in Comics. There's another guy who's a fellow writer, fellow freelance writer, a genuine book reader. And so that Congress of Voices made the subject fascinating for me, even though quite a bit of what Diversity in Comics actually said, his tossed off observations about life, bugged the crap out of me, and still do. I can't stand it when this type of person goes on about cucks or soy boys. I can't stand it when people make peremptory judgments that A, reflect on me without knowing anything about me, although these people don't know that I exist, but you know what I mean, people like me, and B, equate just a whole world of being with your testosterone level. So that at times these channels would look at a picture of a guy at a staff meeting for some comic book company and immediately assess whether or not he was a real man by how he smiled, or by how open his dress shirt was, or any crap like that. I just can't stand stuff like that, especially when I know that it's not true and it's not safe as a way to judge people. Of course, you can't judge people that way and have it come to any sense. There were times when those off the cuff comments, I guess, well, if you like this, you're some sort of soy boy. There were times when I would read it, when I would hear a comment like that on one of these videos, and I would feel a visceral response, a personal visceral response, even though these people don't know I exist and the comment wasn't directed at me. I would still feel a visceral response, something along the lines of, "You really think so? You're a 30-year-old twerp, and I'm an old fossil that you're calling a cock or a soy boy. How about we meet in public and see which of us is..." And it only takes a second to realize how insane a reaction that is. And when I realized how insane that reaction was, I then realized, well, if I felt that for a minute and then corrected myself, what must these much younger comic book professionals who are being attacked on a daily basis feel? Their hatred must be off the charts. And it proved to be so. The ongoing saga of Comicsgate, it has been the increased franticness with which comic book professionals at Marvel have reacted to the increased influence and clout of Diversity in Comics. The more subscribers he got, the more of a reach he got, the more frantic these people seem to be at attacking him, as if they thought comics were a zero-sum game, that the more attention he got, the less attention they got. I loved it. I loved watching it, but I thought it was just a local, a little YouTube thing, and that all changed recently. Diversity in Comics, the guy behind Diversity in Comics, Richard Meyer, created an Indiegogo campaign. He decided, in addition to criticizing Marvel Comics, in addition to policing these people's unprofessional behavior on social media, he would also put his money where his mouth is and start an Indiegogo campaign. Say, okay, I'm not just criticizing what Marvel's doing wrong, I'm also offering to do it right. And I'm going to set a financial goal the way Indiegogo is, and you pledge, and you're my backers, you're my patrons, and I will offer to create a comic book of the type we all want to see. And he set a fairly modest financial goal, and that's when this whole thing became newsworthy, because the Indiegogo financial backer equivalent of the 2016 then happened. His Indiegogo campaign is now up to around $300,000 in one form or another, even after its official cancellation date. In one form or another, he is going to take in $1 million by the end of this year, I guarantee it. Thousands and thousands of dollars per day from backers everywhere donating to this project to make it real. Now, those numbers, somebody getting a $250,000 in a month, would make this newsworthy anyway. They would catapult this whole story anyway, immediately from, some nerdy thing that comics fans are doing, to news. But it gets even more noteworthy than that, because the comic book professionals, including a Marvel Comics writer named Mark Waid, who's a big figure in the industry, wrote 52. He wrote Kingdom Come, for God's sake. He has genuine classics of the genre to his name, and still works in the industry. And was very vocal on social media about how he really didn't want this project to happen. And the Indiegogo campaign was raking in such numbers that the comic book that Diversity in Comics had created and was trying to finance and get made, a thing called Jawbreakers, actually attracted the attention of a publisher, a small publisher called Antarctic Press. And they offered a deal. There you go. There you go. You raised an enormous amount of money in a very short amount of time. You obviously have tapped into an audience. You have an artist. You have colors, and you're doing the inking. You've got all the production down pat. All you needed was a publisher to get the book in diamond catalogs and get it into stores, and now you have one. And something happened. Either Antarctic Press looked at the background of this whole Comicsgate mess and said, okay, I don't know where this started, and I don't know exactly who's right or wrong, but this is toxic. I don't want my company associated with it. Either that happened, or Mark Waid and maybe an amorphous collection of other professionals put pressure on Antarctic Press. But one way or another, they dropped their contract. They pulled out. They said, we're not actually going to publish you. So right now, Diversity in Comics' Indiegogo campaign for Jawbreakers is a weird anomaly. It's like a rogue planet in Star Trek. It has an enormous amount of money. It has an enormous amount of backing and support. It has a great amount of talent on the page, and no publisher. No means to get it to a bookstore. And plenty of bookstore owners saying, well, this guy and his followers are so odious that even if he does get a publisher, we're not going to do it. We're not going to stock it. And also, and he makes a point in his videos, I don't agree with him on a lot, but I agree with him on this, and other people have made this point. These retailers not only said they wouldn't stock the book, they also said they wouldn't order it upon a customer's request. A owner of a comic shop saying, I'm not going to stock this book, is a business decision. It's a flat-out insane business decision if you're talking about this kind of money, this kind of certain sales in an industry where sales have been spiraling downward for a long time. But it's still a business decision. Fine. But a comic shop owner saying, not only am I not going to stock this, but I'm not going to fulfill your order for it. If you offer to pay me money to order this thing when I'm the only comic shop in 20 miles, I'm going to say no for political reasons, for personal reasons, because I don't like the guy who made it. That edges into something different. And that pushes this whole story. Now, this whole story, Comicsgate, Jawbreakers, Indiegogo, Diversity in Comics, all these things that were known only to comics fans last week, I think is about to become known to a much wider audience. Right now, it's only the Comicsgaters hate it when you refer to the alt-right, and they especially hate it when you refer to alt-right Nazis. Nevertheless, if you go to Charlottesville and you march shouting Nazi slogans under a banner of an actual swastika, I don't have any problem using that term. And neither should anybody else, one way or another. Just for shorthand's sake, just so we know what we're talking about here. A week ago, all of this stuff was known only in the comics world. But now, some alt-right or alt-right Nazi news organizations like Breitbart have picked up on it. They didn't care about it when it was small fry, but $300,000 is not small fry. A major comic book company like Marvel Comics, which is owned by by Disney, possibly leaning on a small publisher to get them not to do something for political reasons, for Gang of Five reasons. That's not small. The money, the possibility of a deeper story, these aren't small issues anymore. This is something that will, I believe, if it continues the way it is, tip over into national news. It'll still be comic book national news. So those of you, the people who don't know about comics, won't care anyway. Then they'll never see it in their newsfeed. But it could go big. It could become a flashpoint for something huge. It could reshape the comic book industry in a mild way. And I think that's just fascinating. All this, the personal stuff that I was feeling, I have just, in the last 2 weeks, I've just let it go completely. Who cares whether or not I like one or two things one guy in a video says? If this is becoming a touch point that might change an industry that I've been reading longer than these people have been alive, I want to I want to see what happens. That's the amazing thing. That is what makes it the turbulent end of our comic book day, is that you don't know what's going to happen next. I look at the situation the way it is now. Mark Waid, for instance, the writer I was talking about, abruptly canceled all of his social media. So he's not out there anymore talking about this or anything else. And he used to be a very vocal presence on social media, Twitter especially. He's canceled it all. It's all gone. Tough not to think that that was done at the orders of his superiors at Marvel, who might have taken an alarmed, belated look at what he was doing and said, knock that off immediately or we'll cancel your contract. And he would have a home at DC Comics, the home of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, if he got fired at Marvel, but not if he brings the same crap along. And if Marvel and DC don't hire him, well, anyway, one way or another, he's off the radar. He's not involved in this at the moment. And Diversity in Comics' fans are saying that Mark Waid getting himself involved in his contract with Antarctic Press anyway, in any fashion, is illegal. I myself don't think that's very tenuous. I don't think that's very firm. But one way or another, the story itself is real and is only going to pick up steam from here. And I think that's just fascinating. I don't care anymore whether or not I like the fact that this guy breaks down all of the world into military terms. I don't like the fact that in his ideal world I would have to declare my rank and whatnot in order for people to gauge how much of a man I am and how much of a comics fan I am. That's the thing that bothers me the most about Comicsgate, is this whole sort of gauging that's going on. As I've said a couple of times in these videos over the last 2 years, I don't need to prove my masculinity to anybody. And nobody else does either. And that the fact that that's an element here is the thing that shrieks the most of 4chan. That makes the good arguments that Comicsgate has been raising for 2 years feel a little bit sordid. And it's that element of it that makes the leeriness of publishers to come forward and get involved understandable to me. But only to a point. If this thing reaches $350,000 in pledges to buy a graphic novel, and no publisher considerably bigger than Antarctic Press has come forward and said, to hell with the SJWs, we want a part of this, we want to publish you, I will be very surprised. I want to see what will happen here, and that I will report back when there are other milestone events. I just want to bring you up to date, because I mentioned Comicsgate a long time ago when this guy had 30,000 subscribers, and there was no Indiegogo campaign, and there was no massive pile of money on the table, and there was no possible professional interference from Marvel Comics itself. All of that has made it worthwhile to bring it up again. And I, of course, didn't bring it up at my comic shop. I figure they must get questions all day long about it, and I don't want to add to that, so I just didn't mention it at all. And, as you've seen, right, Comicsgate doesn't really affect my comic book experience anymore. Whether they succeed or not in getting, bigger boobies on female characters in comics or whatever it is that they want Marvel to be. They say we only want good stories. That clearly isn't true. They want good stories from the early 1990s and don't seem to realize it. But one way or another, no matter what they want and no matter how much of it they get, it's still not really going to affect me. I don't see myself reading individual weekly issues of anything anytime soon. So unless the Legion of Superheroes were to begin publishing again, I don't see that happening either. So it doesn't really affect me, which is why in this hideously long comic book video, you have the placid end and the turbulent end. The placid end is the stuff that I'm going to buy and talk about every week, and I promise I'm not going to talk about Comicsgate every week. The turbulent end, though, is that something genuinely newsworthy is happening in the comics world. This snarky, sneering YouTube channel that started months and months ago is, I believe, poised on the brink of changing the industry, of causing a major story to happen in the industry. I think that's fascinating. One way or another, I'm going to wrap it up for now. This was just a gift for the comic book fans. I know a lot of you comic book fans, I doubt there's any comic book fan out there that isn't following Comicsgate, especially now that it's so dramatic. But in one way or another, I'm going to wrap it up for now, and we'll talk about books. So we'll get back to talking about books. So thank you for your patience, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.